Okay. All right. I'm just gonna introduce the company a little bit. Let's see how okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I hope you've got your coffee already. I presume it's probably morning because we're on the eastern side. So, if you're from India, Bangladesh, I hope it's not too early for you. Thank you so much for making time. My name is Keegan, and every Monday, we have a weekly talk for 60 minutes. So I'm going to make sure I make it worth your 60 minutes. Um, just a little bit about our company, Eco Sustainability. We are a Singapore-based company with presence in Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Thailand. I really like this map because in reality, our clients come from all over the world as well. Sustainability is such a big trend these days that globally we're moving in towards the same direction. If you think of sustainability as a marathon, where 2050 is our end goal, we are really in such an interesting time where we're all at the same starting line. And some countries start a year earlier, some countries start a year later. But in reality, if you zoom out, there's really not much of a difference. We're all at the same starting line. Um, Clockwise, obviously, we're a consultancy firm. We have a think tank arm where we participate in a lot of standards contribution. Currently have three active carbon credit projects. We do a lot of training. Some are paid training, some are free talks like this. And of course, sustainability reporting, which is our bread and butter. All right. Whoa, lots of logos, lots of words. Later, we'll talk about how there's a big shift between, voluntary disclosure to mandatory disclosure, how the industry is moving towards marketing into a finance function. So, as with all, evolution of industries, we move towards following standards. So, today we will focus primarily on the one on the top left. I'm sure all of you have heard of the ISSB before. Some people call it the mother of all standards. All right. Gosh, what is standards contribution? What does that mean? All right. So there are global standards such as the ISSB, GHG protocol, SBTI. These are organizations who set the standards. And then there are standard users, people like you who apply the standards. But in between, sort of like a sandwich, are people who actively participate in, you know, contributing to the standards development. These are people who write, technical commentaries, participate in public consultations, and that's us here in Eco Sustainability. We actively participate in the contribution of eight global standards. I believe we are submitting our SASB standards end of this month as well as our second time. And if you see TNFD, that's the standard. If you've been following the news, the TNFD will be very much part of the ISSB. I believe the consultation will open, I think, in four. And by next year, I think we will have an updated ISSB standard that has absorbed a lot of concepts from the TNFD. Okay, quick house keeping. It will be recorded. Please keep your microphones mute. So today, what I'm going to do is I only have 60 minutes with you. So I'm going to try to give you something fresh and new, hopefully with lots of stories from the trenches, instead of just giving you a technical lecture on sustainability reporting. And remember, there's no such thing as a silly question. Nobody in this industry can claim to have, decades of experience because even though sustainability has been around since, I think, the 1950s, the idea of sustainability, but sustainability reporting as we know it today is really, really a brand new um, uh, industry. It's a new discipline. In fact, you surely have heard of this word sustainability accounting, right? Where we account for sustainability. So no such thing as a silly question. You can ask in the chat group. In the inbox, my colleagues will help to answer, and if they don't, I will step in to answer at the end of the talk. All right, so we have five things that we will cover, but I think the most interesting part is actually the third one. How do you start? And also the fourth one, how do you gain clarity and confidence? Now, I'm sure most of you already have a basic idea about sustainability, about ISSB, but maybe it's in bits and pieces. So let's pull everything together. I hope that I am able to give you a lens from which you see sustainability. And from there, I hope everything else after that makes sense. Oh, okay. The big shift from voluntary to mandatory. Now, this is where, if you ask me, there's a lot of gray area between voluntary and mandatory. Most people will define it as binary. So it's either you're doing it voluntarily or you're doing it because your regulator asks you to do it or because there's a requester, right? Um, so um, I don't actually know what is the real definition because to me, it's actually a spectrum. For example, now, the ones that are clearly mandatory would be, let's say, instructions from your SEC, your regulators, your stock exchange. So if you're public listed, the regulators say you literally have to do it, then you have to do it. There are some punitive elements, like if you don't do it, then you may get fined, or in extreme cases, you might, be punished more than that. But in reality, I would see it as a pressure. For example, one of our clients, they, came to us in a state of panic. And they said, "Oh no, I've got this procurement memo from a very large company. They are our biggest company, the biggest client, and they have asked us to report. What do we do? What on earth is this thing?" So we explained to them. So do you think that falls under mandatory or voluntary? I don't know. I think it's a spectrum because technically you can argue and say, well, you don't have to do it. You just don't get the business, right? But if you look at the procurement memo, we in the industry, um, I read a lot of procurement memo, but this procurement memo was very interesting, and it explicitly said failure to disclose may result in reduced business opportunities. It's a very nice legalese way of saying if you don't report, you're out of our supply chain, right? So of course we know this, like we know why people ask the supply chain to report, but to see it with my own eyes, I thought that was really very interesting. Today, there are pressures for CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjusted Mechanism. Um, the, if you're a steel company and you want to export to into the European Union, you have to do reporting. And technically, if you don't want to do reporting, it's not an offense. You just can't get into the market. So is that voluntary? Is that mandatory? I'll leave it to you to decide. But yeah, the way I see it, it's not. There's no real clear line. It's more like a spectrum. Um, all right. Why do companies report? Well, obviously for investor, stakeholder, and transparency. You know, today you take for granted that a company is transparent. Did you know that if you go back to, say, the 1920s, um, why the Great Depression happened? It's because at that time, did you know that when you want to invest in a company, the company is not obligated to tell you about the company. It's up to you. The burden of finding out about the company is actually on the person, on the investor, right? So the companies have no obligation to disclose anything. You want to invest in my company? Go ahead. You don't want to? That's fine. And that was one of the reasons why it led to the Great Depression because people were just investing in things that they don't know about. So today, uh, it would be unheard of for a public listed company to not disclose. But not always been like that. And so we see the same trajectory between um, finance, corporate disclosure with sustainability disclosure as well, risk management and business resilience. So people in risk management, you would know that you have to, do your risk analysis, right? So risk could be, geopolitics. The Straits of Hormuz is closed. Oh no, what's the financial impact on my business? So people look at geopolitics, macroeconomy, they look at the market, consumer trends, etc. But there's a new metric that people are looking at, which is sustainability, right? So risk management people are now adding a additional layer on their risk management. Cost savings and operational efficiency. Now, I have a question. Do you think do you think that if you practice sustainability, you actually always save? Yeah. So if you talk to people, they'll tell you that's not always the case. But obviously, this is a fluid and very dynamic industry. For example, solar panels used to be really expensive. Now it's really, really cheap. So if you're an early adopter of solar panel, there won't be much cost savings. Better procurement, supply chain credibility. Obviously, this is now. So you see the development of the industry. The large companies need to report first, and then there will be pressure into the supply chain. Now I see the trend. The supply chain is getting affected as well. People have to report to their clients. Improve access to financing and lending opportunities. We see this globally across the world. Now, finance emission is a big thing where a bank, when they lend money to the borrower, they actually need to know how much emission that capital costs. Finance emission is really, really complex to calculate. And banks are starting already to calculate. And obviously, if you want to get a green loan, you want to get a cheaper interest rate, you have to be sustainable. Continuous improvement and long-term value creation. I want to share with you a story. I was talking to a pizza company in Cambodia, and they were selling pizza, typical Western style pizza like margarita, Hawaiian pizza, etc. Um, And the carbon footprint of each pizza is really, really high because, if you want to make like margarita or whatever, you need to buy olives from Greece. I don't know. And so we were talking about, why don't you, out of 10 pizzas, why don't you just change three pizzas to a local pizza, a Cambodian pizza. So now the chef has to think, oh no, how do I make a local pizza? Like what Cambodian plants or ingredients can I incorporate that in? And so the idea was very simple. Why don't we produce something that is different for locals? Because when you use Cambodian ingredients, you just have to go down the street and buy your supply from the shop down the road, right? Instead of importing your olive from Greece. So these are things that companies are doing right now. They are thinking of how do you maximize value out of sustainability, which is actually really the heart and soul of the ISSB. Oh, anyone seen this before? Yeah, you have a button that says like a emoji. If you can just give me a thumbs up. Have you seen this before? I actually don't remember living in this era, even though I know I have lived in this era. Before 2023, at the inaugural launch of the ISSB, this was the world we lived in. Um, Everybody had a different framework. There's a difference between a standard and a framework and a guideline, right? So we had standards, frameworks, guidelines. It wasn't that long ago that we lived in this world. Barely 3 or 4 years ago, this was the world that we lived in. And within 3 years, gosh, so much has changed. With the inaugural launch of the ISSB, um, it consolidated, it reduced fragmentation, and it formed a global baseline. In fact, the funny thing is, up to today, would you believe it, there are still people who come up with their own frameworks. Yeah, despite the fact that the ISSB has existed for 3 years, there are still people who come up with their own frameworks. But that shouldn't happen. So if you remember the first video I showed to you, you might have missed it because it was half a second. There was a guy who walked up the stage. He was actually the chair of the IFRS Foundation, which is the governing organization for ISSB. It was June 2023 when the ISSB was announced. Um, it was a very big thing, obviously, in the industry, but people outside the industry didn't know what it was, didn't even care. But if I look back at that point, I would say that's a really pivotal moment in our history of reporting. If you fast forward 10, 20, 50 years from now, and you look back at one incident that completely changed the course of the industry, to me, that was the launch of the ISSB. Okay, why? This slide is why. Because for the first time, there was a global baseline. There was one mother of all standards that form a standard that is comparable, that is business friendly, and I'll explain the business friendly part later. And it formed a global baseline for other standards to build upon, to add on. And it also allowed regulators and the capital markets to use it, right? Um, this is just a little bit of history. So the IFRS or the IS, we use the word interchangeably, even though it's actually not the same thing. The ISSB was actually built on the shoulders of giants. It wasn't created out of the blue. It was created because there were a lot of stakeholders who were going to the IFRS and saying, can you please step in and create a global standard? And so it took bits and pieces, the good stuff from different existing and also very respectable standards. For example, the TPT was at the time a very respectable standard. I talked about transitioning into the new world, into a world of decarbonization. TCFD is the cornerstone of the ISSB. Today, when we talk about the ISSB, when we talk about the uh, relationship between sustainability and financial impact, that actually was drawn a lot from the TCFD. And if you look at IR, integrated reporting, um, today the trend is that companies report sustainably, do the sustainability report and report it with the financial report, right? And there is an important concept called connected information, where you literally connect sustainability and finance. These ideas came from IR, right? SASB, of course, is a fairly old standard, but a very important standard. Today, the ISSB has a required guidance, and it names the SASB as the required guidance. CDP, oh, this is where a lot of risk and opportunity concepts on risk and opportunity came from. If you have done CDP, I love CDP. I think it's a fantastic standard. I think it does extremely well with for the risk and opportunities analysis. And of course, GRI, the world's most used standard, a very important standard as well. And there's a lot of misconception that you have to choose one or the other. That's not true at all. And I'll explain to you like what is the thought process of so-called choosing a standard. So, but you do not choose either ISSB or GRI. Okay, I want to make sure everybody's clear. Okay, so just a little bit of like peep behind how things work behind the ISSB. So if you notice at the bottom, you see the International Accounting Standards Board, or the IASB, sort of like the cousin of the ISSB. If you notice today, when we talk about sustainability, the first questions clients always ask would be, so who's gonna do it? Well, it's not the CMO, that's for sure, but very often it is the CFO, Chief Financial Officer. Um, it can be a CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer, but if you don't have a CSO, it would almost certainly be a CFO job. Okay, why? Because remember, we're talking about disclosure. And if I ask you, is this company a good company or a bad company? There is a language that you use, and that's the financial language, right? So think about financial language being the language of business, right? So I can't say, well, I shouldn't be saying, oh, this company is really good, but it's not good. I use accounting language, right? I talk about profit, loss, assets, liability, profit margins, etc. So today, sustainability has a language as well. Do you remember those days when we used to do CSR? You know, a company would go to the beach and do a beach cleaning, like pick up rubbish from the beach and then take some pictures and then say, "Oh, we love the environment. We clean the beach, we clean the river." Or they would go to an orphanage and they'll hug some children and they'll say, we give back to the society. But today, the language that we use for sustainability is so developed that there is a fixed set of jargons, lexicons that we get. It's a very rich, it's become a very rich uh, set of words, right? So that's why the IFRS was the most appropriate foundation to build this global baseline. There's a huge relationship between finance and sustainability. In fact, that's literally the heart and soul of the ISSB, right? Sometimes we use the word sustainability related financial disclosure, right? These four words. Okay, time check. All right. Setting a global baseline. So the ISSB is a global baseline. Okay, what does this mean? A global baseline means it has to be industry agnostic. So it doesn't matter if you're a food processing company, you're in oil and gas, you're in steel, you're in garments, you use the same standard to disclose because it has a fixed building block. Okay. But on top of that, you are able to add on more standards, such as jurisdiction specific standards. If you have multi stakeholders, so again, you go back to who reads your report. If it's an environmentalist, if it's a larger company, you have multi stakeholders. So you report based on the intended user. All right. The ISSB standards is a comprehensive foundation for disclosures for global jurisdiction adoption. It is a very business friendly um, standard. So if you remember a long time, well, not long time ago, like even today, when people say, "Oh, I have to report, I have to pay a fancy consultant, I have to buy a carbon accounting software, I have to do this, do that." What is the ROI? Like, what does it have to do with my business? So today, people are doing it for compliance, but in fact, the ISSB is really, really useful for you to report it for competitiveness, right? Because it, for the first time, in the history, in the short history of reporting, comes one standard that truly links sustainability and finance, right? It is a common language for comparable decision useful disclosures. Okay, let me ask you a quick question. Suppose you are a regulator and you want to impose a carbon tax. How do you impose a carbon tax if everybody calculates carbon emission differently, right? That's why you need a common language. So the word comparability is a very important word in reporting because you need to have your report comparable to your to another company. So when a large company weighs two companies, they are able to weigh it effectively because they both disclose similar metrics, the same metrics, right? Okay, develop standards for, okay, I'm doing a time check. I want to spend a little bit more time on questions, so I'll skip this a little bit faster. Okay, let's look at the ISSB adoption around the world. Um, if you look back just on the first bar, that's the quarter one of 2024. Remember, the ISSB was launched in June 2023. So within 6 months plus, you've already gotten a couple of, a dozen plus jurisdictions to adopt it. By the way, why do we say jurisdiction and not countries? Because a jurisdiction may not necessarily be a country. For example, the European Union is one jurisdiction, even though it has many different countries. I believe in America, I believe in many instances, California is its own jurisdiction. So it's one country, but it has a couple of smaller jurisdictions. So that's why we say jurisdiction. So if you fast forward to quarter two in 2026, which is last quarter, you'll see that the adoption has increased tremendously. And this is a global trend. And the reason why it's a global trend, because it's adopted by regulators, right? It is mandated by the regulators. So all regulators adopt ISSB in one form or another. There are some, maybe 1 or 2% of differences because they have to localize, but generally it is the ISSB. All right. Be- um, I mentioned that we do not choose one standard over the other. This is the most important slide in today's talk. So the ISSB does very well on the left side, the financial materiality side. All right. So, for example, if you, um, let's say you're a global coffee company, okay, and you buy your coffee beans from Guatemala, or, Colombia, and let's say there's a drought or there's a typhoon or whatever, okay, some climate disaster. What is the financial impact on you if the crops die? So that's the financial materiality. So it looks inwards from outside to your company, whereas there is impact materiality, where it looks at your operations and its effect to the larger world. For example, let's say if you're a developer, you need to cut down a lot of trees to build your buildings. So that's your effect to the environment, right? So I want to make this clear because there's a lot of misconceptions that you only use the ISSB. No, you use the ISSB as a global baseline, but you also do your materiality assessment and you ask who is reading this. Obviously, if an environmentalist or there are many other stakeholders ask you for the report, you have to then use impact materiality. All right. Of course, that would be the GRI. There are jurisdictions that wants you to do double materiality. All right. So if you're complaining like, too much reporting burden, imagine there are companies in the EU where they need to do double materiality. So count yourself lucky if your regulator only imposes the financial materiality part, right? But in reality, you don't report just to the regulators, you report to a broad stakeholder. Okay. Now, time check. Okay, so I won't go into the ISSB too much, but suffice to say, there are four key content areas on the governance, the strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. Okay, what is that? How does that look like? You see, governance is actually not um, as simple as a lot of people think. Governance has to do with, of course, who governs it, the processes, the internal controls, but it's really so much more than that. When you do carbon accounting, that's when governance really comes in because you need that whole process, your basis of preparation, your monitoring plan, all this needs to be documented. Or for example, let's say um, you need to recalculate your baseline, right? So in carbon accounting, there's a lot of misconception. People think your first year of reporting is your baseline. Not necessarily. Your baseline can be your fifth year. Your baseline can change. Who decides when do you trigger a recalculation? It's actually the board. So the board has a really heavy responsibility, right? Strategy. Okay, so today we talk about sustainability as a business driver. So it's no longer just for compliance. Like I mentioned, the Cambodian pizza story. So the head chef who was making the pizza now has to think, how do I make Cambodian pizza for local people and potentially capture market share, right? Um, Risk, oh gosh, this is such a huge part of the ISSB. Both strategy and risk is going to form a huge part of your reporting. Today we're talking about climate resilience, how prepared you are with climate change, for example, or risk. There's physical risk, there's transition risk. What happens? Are you ready for carbon tax? Are you ready for an ETS? Are you ready for opportunities as well, like green loans? If there's a green loan out there where you get a 1% discount, are you ready to borrow the money? Are you ready for grants, green grants? So risk opportunity forms a big part of the ISSB. And of course, metrics and targets. Um, one of the cornerstones of reporting is obviously the carbon emission. Carbon emission is really, really complex. Um, um, and you have to set your targets well. And if you want to go into net zero, you can't just claim to be net zero. I think there was a French company that was fined a lot of money for claiming net zero. In fact, they didn't even claim they're net zero. They're saying, if you buy my fuel, you are on the way to net zero, something like that. It wasn't even like an outright misstatement, but there are many jurisdictions that have rules against uh, wrong claims in sustainability as well, greenwashing, right? So make sure you get your metrics and targets done properly. Okay, quick check. All right. Sustainability related financial disclosure. What does ISSB really mean? I like to think of it as the three P's: financial performance, as in if you adopt sustainability, are you able to capture new markets, new opportunities, get green loans, get into supply chains, etc.? There is the financial prospects as well. Are you able to find a new market, create a new product? Sometimes creating sustainable products, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes could actually be good for business. It could actually lower your cost. It could increase market share, right? And also, okay, so it's not just environmental impact, but it's also financial impact as well. This is why the ISSB emphasizes on one key concept, that is the connected information. Right now, if you read all the reports, to be fair, most people are reporting it for the first, second, or third time, right? Most of them for the first time. So they are not able to, for now, make a very strong link between sustainability and finance. All right. So this is what we call informally a low quality disclosure. Now, when someone says low quality disclosure, it's not an insult. It just means that you are barely just, you know, like adhering or aligning to the standard, but not fully aligning to the standard, right? So low quality is not a bad word. It just means that you're kind of doing the bare minimum. You are invoking the reliefs. Reliefs basically means if you have to do five things, but the standards will say, well, do three, but for the other two, you can do it later, right? So a lot of companies will invoke the relief as well. So that would be a low quality report as opposed to a high quality report. For example, in carbon accounting, you know that there are data tiers. If you buy a plastic cup, you actually call your supplier and say, hey, Mr. Supplier, what is the carbon footprint of this paper cup? But if your supplier doesn't have it, you can just quote a global number. Okay. So if you quote a global number, that's an estimation. That would be a so-called low quality report. All right. A mini case, this was the one I mentioned. So if you're a coffee importer, you face a lot of physical risk. If there's a heavy rain in Guatemala or the Straits of Hormuz is closed, what is the impact on your finance? And here's the funny thing, you can do a lot of analysis. You know, for example, every rainy season will have an impact 6 months later to you, right? You can actually do your financial analysis, you can do your financial modeling, you can do your business resilience analysis, right? Just by looking at data on, let's say, heavy rain in Guatemala, right? For a courier company, in fact, this is actually a real client of ours. They do last mile delivery, and they were sharing with me, every time there's a flood, um, it causes business disruption because the delivery guys can't go out. It causes a backlog. It causes some penalty because you fail to deliver the products. Um, and also there's reputational risk as well. The company might switch suppliers. All right, getting started with sustainability reporting. Um, where do we start? Okay, so obviously you do your business context. Um, if you're doing carbon accounting, which you will do, get all the basic stuff right. For example, are you using a financial control, operational control, equity method? Get all this basic stuff done correctly. Do your materiality assessment, like think of 10 topics that are material, and then maybe focus on three topics. Map the data. Oh, this is really, really difficult because when you start to map the data, you need a registry. You need to say, okay, this is my single source of truth. This is all the data. Just designing the data mapping itself is hell because it's really, really difficult. At the end of the day, we are sustainability people, but we may not be industry experts as well. How people always say scope three is really difficult. If you can ask me, scope one is really difficult. You know why? Because when you go into scope one, you really have to be an engineer. Like, what's the difference between uh, a steam boiler and a hot water boiler? Man, I don't know. I mean, I'm not an engineer. I can barely change a light bulb. So it it's really, really difficult if you're not an engineer. And obviously you have to be multi-talented, you have to be an engineer, you have to be a scientist, you have to be in ops. So if you ask me, actually scope one is really more difficult than scope three. Because scope three, technically you can use spend-based methodology. And then you create your baseline data. Collaboration, this is really in theory sounds easy, but actually really, really tough because you need to get data from multiple departments. And this is assuming that they have the data. Most of the time, they don't have the data. They don't have a system to collect the data. There is no data cleaning, data hygiene, internal audits. None of this, generally speaking, right? Um, yeah, okay. So three golden rules before you start. This is just practical advice. Start with data you already have. Um, you see, car sustainability report, and then part of it is carbon accounting. Carbon accounting is rule based. So if you follow the rule, technically no one can challenge you. So there's no concept of fairness in carbon accounting. So no one can say, oh, but why did you do this instead of this? If the rule says you can do A, then you can do A. You don't have to do B, right? So start with the data you already have and work on that. Don't aim for perfection. And it's actually really a team effort, not just internally, but externally as well. You work with consultants like myself, people who prepare the data. If you outsource the preparation, you work with auditors, you work with regulators as well. Okay, I'm gonna skip all this because this is elaboration of all that. All right. To sum it up, uh, the buzzword these days is always sustainability, value creation, right? So, what do you do after you report? How do you maximize the value? So, I like the part that says, you see, point four, companies that start early gain a competitive advantage. Now, just to share with you a little bit tip, so I'm taking my consultant hat off and I'm speaking to you as a friend. These days, the strategy for a lot of forward-thinking company is to be the first. You see, if you're the best, someone else can be the best tomorrow. But if you're the first, very it's very hard to challenge. Of course, make sure you're actually the first. You can be the first university in Thailand to create a module based on ISSB, right? In fact, Eco Sustainability was the first firm in Singapore to create a module with the Singapore Institute of Technology on sustainability reporting, right? So find your first, use it as a competitive edge, use it as PR. You can. And I say this with love because this is something I really strongly feel it is really an early bird gets the worm kind of situation. I want to share with you a story. In Cambodia, 3 years ago, I consulted a shopping mall in Phnom Penh, and I said, today, no shopping mall in Cambodia has done a report. You should be the first one. You don't even have to do it well, you just have to be the first to publish it. Sadly, that shopping mall didn't do anything, and today they have lost that opportunity. So these opportunities don't come always. It only happens because we are in the very early stage um, of the industry. All right. Now, from a standards perspective, there is zero value to be the first, but from a PR, from a marketing perspective, there's a lot of value to be the first. So keep that in mind. All right, I'm right on time. We have 10 minutes for Q&A. I'm gonna try looking. Okay, Lei asks, when a company reports US ISSB and GRI, can it say it's using double materiality? Yes, because both the ISSB and GRI function fairly differently, although there is a lot of efforts to make it a little bit more interoperable. But short answer, yes. Ying Ying says, if you are reporting based on SASB S1 and S2, which department should take the lead? Finance, sustainability, or risk department? Okay, so I think you mean ISSB S1 and S2. So SASB is a industry specific standard. For example, if you're in textile, food processing, oil and gas, healthcare, um, that would be the SASB standard. For example, medical waste, it's a very specific thing for hospitals, or medical negligence, that's a very specific thing for hospitals. That's the SASB. For the ISSB S1, S2, okay, so which department should take the lead? Well, honestly, there's no rule that says which department. Uh, but in practice, obviously, it's the CSO if you have a CSO. If not, it would be the CFO. That's the practice. Or they could work together with different streamlines. So if you look at Singtel, the telco from Singapore, they have different working groups, but they're all under the governance of the management. And then on top of that is the sustainability board. Yeah. Any other questions? Don't be shy. Okay, while you write the questions, I'm just going to wrap up a little bit. Okay, so every Monday, we have uh, talks. So we've been doing this for the since last year, and this today is the start of the new quarter. So I'm the first speaker for this quarter. So we have a total of 12 talks. Next week, oh, very interesting talk. It is on sustainability driver as a business advantage. To be honest, this is actually our hottest topic in two of the quarters that we've done. It's actually the hottest topic. My colleague Ariel from Indonesia will do that. If you're operating in Indonesia or work with Indonesian companies, please come to the Indonesian regulatory landscape on the 27th. We also have a talk on carbon accounting, Thai regulatory landscape by my colleague Charinrat Pankum. And CBAM, oh, that's the hot topic nowadays. Or if you're in steel, aluminum, fertilizer, energy, you must come for the CBAM talk. We will repeat the Sustainability Reporting 101, and then Sustainability as Business Driver, it's a repeat. On the 7th of September is the Philippines regulatory landscape. So if you might know, the Philippines has mandated sustainability reporting. Lots of buzz and lots of action. So do come for that. And on the 14th is the use of AI in sustainability. We'll share some ideas. So I'm sure everybody is using AI right now. What are the rules of using AI? What will the auditor look for when you use AI? What can you upload? What you cannot upload? These are things we will explore. Uh, After that will be the Malaysian regulatory landscape, and then we will wrap up with a bang with our consultant, Henry Rantau, who is our carbon credit expert. He will give a 1 hour talk on what carbon credits are. So, if quick pop quiz, okay, can you buy carbon credit to offset your carbon emission? Yes or no? And if you're not sure, you have to come for that. Okay, I'm looking at the questions. Okay, we are Sada Jalil is asking, we are transitioning from impact materiality to financial materiality. Where should we start? Okay, that's a good question. So out there are a lot of guidance from for this transition. Okay, so again, problematic. I mean, not problem, like words. Um, So s sometimes people may misunderstand when you say I transition from impact to financial material, it means you are discarding the impact materiality part. I know you don't mean it, but that people could misunderstand. So technically, you're not transitioning. You're looking at the intended user. You're asking yourself why you're reporting, and then you use materiality as the test to figure out which topics are important. Okay. Um, I would say do your materiality matrix. That's the most important thing, which could include both financial and impact materiality. Okay. What else? Do we miss anything? Okay, so keep coming. I'll answer them. All right. Um, we have enquiries. If you have enquiries, these are the 5 people you look for. Well, we're a global company, so if you're outside Southeast Asia, you are free to call any one of these business development consultants. But specifically, if you're from Malaysia, talk to Teng Lau. If you're from Indonesia, talk to Henry Rantau and Ariel Amadeo. If you are from the Philippines, talk to CD Despi. And if you're from Thailand, talk to Charinrat Pankum. Okay. But if you're from outside of any of these countries, you can talk to any one of them. And of course, join our community. I believe my colleague CD has put some link. Our LinkedIn is we'll update there. But for the talks, every Monday we have talks at 11 o'clock Singapore time or 8:30 Singapore time. If you want to not miss any talk, please join our WhatsApp. You can scan it or you can click on the link in the chat box. All right. So just to wrap up, I think the really the as corny as it sounds, really the goal of eco-sustainability is really to build a world where every company is a sustainability superstar. Because it's something that all the consultants feel very strongly about. If you look at the climate crisis that we are in right now, um, just some final words. Sometimes we get too bogged down into the technicalities. Um, we think like, oh, carbon accounting, where we do we put the biogenics, what are the seven gases? We forget why we do what we do, and at the end of the world it is really to save the world from a human-made climate disaster, right? Thank you so much. I will still be here if you have questions. Otherwise, thank you for spending 60 minutes of your time. I hope you have a good week, and I'll see you for the next talk next Monday.